I admitted that I just don't know where we're going now. It's like because things have materialized so quickly. I mean, I didn't see, for example, Mark Zuckerberg capitulating to Trump in this way. We've seen that with Jeff Bezos, for example. So literally, we're talking about the top three dudes in America that control the vast majority of the global information ecosystem. That's oligarchy, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, oligarchy with all the power holders, hanging out together and I guess lifting a lot of weights and yeah.
Yeah.
Deciding
So,
the fate of the world with little knowledge or care for how it impacts the rest of us. So, yeah, terrifying.
because effectively, the area that you specialize in, they're basically in control of it right now, in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, like the area that I study and engage with is child involved tech policy, youth tech policy, as well as other things like ethical design and rights by design, which is policy in the sense of like a company's own policy. Their
Mm.
own tenets could include like a commitment to children's rights or best interests and ethics. Um, and they control a lot, like the people you just mentioned, but not everything, because kids are also already kind of in a weird position in a lot of those spaces. Um, Officially banned, officially kind of like very reduced access in a lot of instances. So they're also in other places, and those tech giants like Disney and Roblox, Epic, haven't yet drunk the Kool-Aid and jumped over to the dark side. Um, and we'll see what happens with that. It's a I think a little bit of a more complicated set of issues that are going on there. And I'm interested to see, for instance, how Meta's recent like complete abandoning of any kind of decency and content moderation, or support for people who are being harassed will translate to their policies vis-a-vis children, especially the under 13, like actual children, not teens,
Yep.
because like what tends to happen with these guys, but with everybody, with policymakers, with pundits, with advocates, is unless they're talking specifically about children, they tend to forget that children even exist, and they don't think through how is this move going to impact them, and then how will the public react when horrible things happen. So they seem consistently caught off guard by these things.
Yeah.
Think of like the horrors of when Meta rolled out the VR spaces that had all those problematic bad actors, both like really criminal like level activity to just people messing around, right, and harassing kids and making them feel terrible, which should also be criminal, but it's not always. It like this was easily foreseeable, and yet it was like this total surprise, even though we've had 2 decades worth of kids, and various people of various ages interacting in play spaces and having things happen and having to intervene, and having people complain and having kids get harmed or just be really disturbed by what they're encountering. And yet again and again, it comes in as some sort of after the fact reaction, as if it's completely unforeseeable that if children are in a space with no guardrails, no protections, no people looking out for them, that they're not going to, run into risk or worse.
Yeah. And we did warn about it. I mean, you see me on LinkedIn, especially, that I rant about this quite a lot because, like, when we were at Google Campus London in 2014, around that time, there was a lot of debate then whether or not you should, or we should, as a sector, we should even consider pushing AI on the web.
Right.
And there were voices, I think even somebody, I think probably even Mo Gaudat at the time, I can't remember if he left Google But for those who don't know, Mo Gaudat was the CEO of Google X, which is like the research and development arm of Google. So that's the brain of Google, as it were. And he quit because he had a really horrible family tragedy. But I'm sure at the time he was one of the major voices that did not want AI to be on the web at all. I personally don't fully agree with that. My position at the time was that we should put AI is fine so long as you have guardrails. You must have human intervention, because the general idea, as is the case with all of the big corporations, is how do we get things quickly out there that can maximize profit? There is no issues with profit. I'm an entrepreneur. I have no issues with profit, but you can't screw people over or completely ignore people's welfare so that you can make extra cash, right? So, as you said, I get really annoyed when I see people, oh, this is so surprising. How could this happen? I'm like, what in the hell are you talking about? A tiny company, we've been warning this for like 10 years. You had people like Gary Marcus that was warning this, I think, for 20 years even. So, we were out there speaking out. People just didn't listen. The governments didn't, obviously. The corporations didn't. The Facebooks of this world didn't. So now here we are. And I remember when we and I spoke the last time, you used the term that kind of hit me a little bit, even though, it's like we've seen all these problems for quite a long time, children being almost the biggest victims of social networks and the web, etc. But you made a term that children don't have any rights compared to an adult. So if you're an 18-year-old or above, you've got more rights and legal protections online than children. So how the hell did we get here?
Yeah, well, I mean, children do actually have rights, but they're not always enforced or protected in the digital realm. Like
So they
that.
don't have any online rights. I mean, obviously in the real world, like outside, in the real, they have rights, but I meant online specifically.
They do.
Oh, really? Okay, that's
In
interesting.
practice, they're not always respected. So,
Okay.
the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child in 2021 released it's called like a general comment, and it's a clarification on how this convention about children's rights applies in certain situations. And this situation, General Comment 25, was all about children's rights in the digital environment. So until 2021, it wasn't that children didn't have rights, but it was really unclear to many different governments, companies, children, people, how exactly they translated to the spaces. Part of that, I think, is the weird status of most online spaces or digital spaces, connected spaces, as like private spaces or quasi private, quasi public. And so there really needed to be just like a real clear guidance for how the rights that already exist do translate. So the GC25, kind of like General Comment 25, GC25 really made that very explicit. In places like the UK, but many other places, the Netherlands, France, Ireland, places around the world as well, have now brought in their own either guidelines, oftentimes it's like a code, like the children's code in the UK, to further clarify how this applies in their particular context. So children do have rights, but they're not always respected. And there's a lot of status quo that kind of just ignores them. I mean, I think we were maybe talking specifically about children's right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. They do have that right. This is already articulated in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And different countries that have signed on to that, which is all countries in the world except for one, are supposed to protect that right. And guess which is the one that hasn't signed on?
Mm-hmm.
The big one, right? The
big
United
one.
States.
The Big Apple.
Exactly. So in terms of setting the status quo, obviously, with so many big tech companies coming from the States and being, sort of based primarily in the States or sort of focusing first on a US audience. The issue of children's rights has historically not really been there. It's been more like parents' rights. You hear a lot about that. Now what people are doing in the States who are, interested in supporting children and making sure that they do have their rights upheld within a context where it's not actually part of there's no legal obligation or even, commitment to upholding children's rights. They're talking about best interests, and they're talking about how do we, actually they're talking a little bit more about children's rights because they see so many other countries and people talking about it. But they're trying to bring these issues to the forefront, and it's really an uphill battle. But yeah, if we look to other countries, we can see there's been, like, since 2021 especially, a growing movement towards, like, making sure that children's rights are upheld. And, like, that's what makes this such a frustrating turn of events, with, Meta and all of these companies kind of, like, abandoning user rights. Is they already were not quite on the bandwagon. Like, they already weren't quite there, but it seemed like they were maybe shifting that way. And yeah, I am always worried about these movements. If they don't gain enough momentum quickly enough, they can fritter out, right? They can kind of, like, fade. And this is definitely an odd, it's a huge hurdle, and it could result in, I think, a bunch of different possibilities. You have, like, a number of states in the United States that are bringing in child labor laws to apply to social media and to family influencers and child influencers, which is, like, a really great win for children's rights.
Yep.
And right at this same time, you have states and whole countries, of course, like Australia, they're just, like, banning unilaterally banning
Which
young
is silly.
people
Yeah.
Under this age or that age from even using, a very ill-defined set of technologies. They'll say social media or, like, or phones. Like, it's so broad and ambiguous what that even applies to. What are the exceptions? Can parents override this? And it's always contingent on this particular location. So it's a really, it's a confusing time. It's hard to see what's going to happen next. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure, like, children's rights exist, and there's actually, like, a lot of like, governments, a lot of, like, advocacy groups, a lot of academics, children's groups that are really fighting for that to be part of the conversation moving forward with how AI is deployed, how it's regulated, how existing technologies, adapt and move forward from here. But yeah, there's this backlash against just users generally, is almost certainly going to impact and challenge the momentum of that movement, because it's, like, so in the opposite direction.
Yeah. And the thing I always like to remind people, because there's obviously a lot of voices out there that complain and moan about that there's too much regulation, that we need to reduce regulations because regulation, quote unquote, stifles innovation. As somebody that is involved in innovation, I call the bullshit here, because the whole point of innovation that nothing stifles it. It's like you're literally, whatever challenges or whatever barriers you come across, you try to work out ways around the barriers to actually, if it becomes like with my company, now we see regulations actually as an opportunity for us to figure out, well, how do we make AI models smarter so that they effectively, quote unquote, understand regulations? Because right now, it's literally complete nonsense. And I think you're absolutely right. Is that, I mean, sorry, like, going back to the point that I remind people that a lot of the issues that we've seen, for example, the rise of children's depression, as a direct result of social media, self-harm, etc. This is under current regulations and current censorships. So now they're actually reducing that even further. I really don't even want to think what are the potential consequences out there for something like that to happen, for them to completely reduce or even get rid of any guardrails, it seems right now. I mean, they didn't have enough in the first place. And I've seen another report, I can't remember where from, but I will put the link in the description, that I think that Meta as well now, whatever algorithms they had that stopped any harmful information or rather harmful content or misinformation to go viral, while they shutting down these algorithms.